Our lesson this coming Sunday, March the 16th, is entitled, What We Work For, and we're going to be looking now at 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Remember, Sunday school teacher, now last Sunday it was who we work for. And Paul wanted to help these who were slaves in households to say, you're not just working for that master, you're really working for Christ if you're a Christian. Now, this lesson is not who we work for, though it's still there, the idea that we work for Christ, but it's what we work for. Now there's going to come another dimension into this whole matter now of working. We said, first of all, in Genesis, we are to work for God. God created Adam and Eve and put them in the garden, and we're to work for Him and subdue and rule in His behalf and have dominion over. So we're working with God in that lesson and for God. The second lesson, then, we're working for Christ no matter what our circumstances. Now, what we're working for here is Paul wants them to realize you are making some. How about working to help others? There are some other Christians who are needy. Be aware of others and help them out. Those of you who have some and do this. Now, Paul is writing this letter now to the church at Corinth. Paul started that church on the second missionary journey. He came back and visited that church on the third missionary journey, and Paul probably wrote as many as 4 letters to the Christians at Corinth. You and I have 2 letters in our New Testament, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, but most New Testament teachers all agree that he wrote a letter to them before he wrote 1 Corinthians, because in 1 Corinthians 5:9 he says, the former letter that I wrote you. So we know that he wrote a letter before 1 Corinthians, and then many scholars think he wrote another letter that we may not have, because in 2 Corinthians he says the angry or hasty letter that I wrote, and that doesn't sound like 1 Corinthians. So Paul was heavy in writing to the Christians at Corinth, but he's going to say to the Christians at Corinth, hey, let me tell you about some Christians up in Macedonia. Now, Macedonia was where Philippi was located. That probably was Paul's favorite church. It would be the Philippians who would send a love offering to Paul when he was later in prison at Rome. Now, Paul, though, is not yet in Rome when he wrote 2 Corinthians. He's in Ephesus on the third missionary journey. But he's going to write these Christians and use some Christians in Macedonia, northeastern Greece, to challenge and inspire these Christians living in central Greece at Corinth. So he's going to say, hey, when you work, how about working to help others that are in need? Let me tell you about these Christians and their wonderful attitude. So he's going to use the wonderful attitude of the Christians in Macedonia, very likely Philippi, to inspire and challenge and motivate the Christians in Corinth to give to help the needy Christians. Now, we know that Paul, when he wrote 2 Corinthians, was on his third missionary journey. He's taking a love offering to help the needy Christians in Jerusalem, in the area of Judea. And he wants the Christians then, the Gentile Christians, to show their love for Jewish Christians. Now, sometimes Jewish Christians were not all that kind toward Gentile Christians. There were some Christians we read about in the book of Acts called Judaizers, some converted Pharisees, who didn't think Gentiles could be saved by faith in Christ alone. They had to believe in Jesus and be circumcised. And they kind of had a snooty attitude toward Gentile Christians, but Paul wants these Gentile Christians to show a Christ-like attitude by helping maybe even some of these who had snooty attitudes, but they're now physically poor, financially poor, and Paul wants them to show that extraordinary grace and love of Christ by giving. And he uses the example of the Macedonian Christians to inspire the Christians at Corinth. All right, now let's look at chapter 8, verses 1.